So Dan, thanks for taking the time just to share a bit of your story with the Epic community and with me, actually, personally. I appreciate it. I wonder if you can just tell us a bit about, like, everyone's had a pandemic year and we all think like, wow, it's been the hardest year, or we have this filter that goes through when we think back to 2020 and a good chunk of 2021. But you've had a year, like layers that went way beyond the pandemic. I wonder what you want to tell us when you look back. What's that year been like for you personally?
Sure, yeah. Pandemic year was quite difficult. I started off 2020 actually living in Sylvan Lake, and then it was a really challenging time for me there. And so I came back. I own a house in Calgary, but I came back to live in it again early on in the year, just because I was, lonely and struggling in a lot of ways, and just needed to find home again and kind of find some peace again.
And that was early in 2020.
Yeah. So that was, I probably moved end of January.
Yeah.
And then first Sunday back, I woke up and thought, I should Google a Vineyard Church in town. And so Epic was the first one that popped up. And so I thought, I'll check it out.
I remember that day. I remember meeting you, and I think maybe I saw you again 2 weeks later or something.
Yeah.
It's very close to when we then were.
Yeah, I attended Epic 3 Sundays before lockdown started.
Right.
But thankfully, the Epic community was amazing, and I was immediately sucked in, and in a good way. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
I was in two different people's house. This house.
Yeah, because you came here for that
Ash Wednesday.
Ash Wednesday liturgy that night. Yeah.
And then the pancake supper the night before.
Right.
And so
was that at Becker's?
Yeah. And so within those 3 weeks, I really felt quite connected.
Yeah, and building relationship and being folded into community. It's amazing how quick hospitality can make someone belong.
Totally. Yeah.
Okay, but that would be another whole talk. Okay.
Yeah.
So.
And then then lockdown started in Calgary, and during that time I was starting to have some health issues that I wasn't sure about, and my brother, who was a nurse, who I had just seen right before lockdown started, noticed a big lump in my neck that I didn't really pay attention to, but it was actually like a visible lump, and so at that point I started getting some medical appointments, and after a lot of appointments and tests and a little surgery to remove one of my lymph nodes, they found Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Wow.
And then afterwards, through PET scan, I found out it was stage 3, which is
pretty serious.
Yeah, almost the top.
Right.
So
wow.
Yeah, pandemic, feeling isolated, and then being diagnosed with cancer, and having a compromised immune system meant that I had to be extra careful.
Yes, we all were careful, but you had a layer of, I have to be like uber careful, especially because you started treatment and your immune system would have been hammered. Yeah,
so I started treatment, I believe, end of April. And so I didn't see anyone. I left the house every second week to go get chemo and then other medical appointments, but that was
kind of it.
Yeah, that was it. And so I had amazing roommates that bought me groceries, and different people from Epic brought over freezer food and different things. And a garden. Yeah.
I remember that.
I had a garden in my front yard all of a sudden, which was amazing. Yeah. So I felt very, very loved, very cared for, but also very incredibly alone. I knew people were praying for me. I knew people were behind me, but I did feel entirely on my own in a lot of ways.
And partly that is yes, you were physically isolated, but nobody was having your experience of a horrible health crisis, hard diagnosis, going through the suffering. I know enough to know chemo's not a walk in the park.
No.
And the head games and all the things that you would have been faced with. That is an alone journey for anyone who suffers like that, but maybe especially so for you in that pandemic season as a single person, and even living in community wouldn't have quite been able to touch that place. So what did Jesus do? This is a giant question, and it's laughable that we're trying to do this in a God story on a simple Sunday, but you know, I obviously prepped this conversation with giving you the questions ahead of time, but like, what's the Lord done, or how has Jesus met you in this season? What has Jesus taught you? I don't want to be too prescriptive, but what's that been like for you?
That is a big question. I think above all else that Jesus is enough, and that Jesus is with me.
Right.
I wrote out things.
Go ahead.
I might just read.
Read from the journal, Dan.
Yeah.
This is so appropriate. You guys maybe don't know this. I have an opinion. My opinion is Dan's quite gifted as a writer, so it's actually good for us to hear some of what you've written down, and it'll help us kind of, I think, for you to distill what it is that the Lord's taught you. So go ahead.
Sure.
Go ahead.
So what have I learned? I've learned that Jesus is enough and that Jesus is beautiful. I had a lot of plans for 2020, so many things that I thought I would do for God, but all ideas and ministry was taken away, and so many forms of community were also taken away. Then I found myself experiencing the truest love and fellowship, the source of all the things I had thought I had lost were still there. The person of Jesus there in my room, the deepest of loves and the truest of friends. He was there in my room so many nights saying, I will never leave you. As for accomplishments in ministry, there's nothing better than loving Jesus, ministering to his feet and adoring and loving him.
It's really profound. I mean, like, I feel teary just hearing you read it. Those are costly words to learn and to live, but that you would have had Jesus, the source of all the things that you longed for, be present to you, and to experience that, like you felt him tangibly. I'm assuming this isn't like sort of an idea.
No, there were many nights where I felt like I could almost see him in the room with me, sitting on the floor with me, and just being there holding my hand or whatever.
How does that reframe? I don't know if reframe's the right way, but like, you know, your discipleship went deeper because you've had a fellowship. I like that you used the word fellowship with Jesus that you didn't know before the beginning of this cancer diagnosis and the crisis of the pandemic year, plus having a journey through treatment. So how do you, what's your life as a disciple look like, as a follower of Jesus? How has it changed? Do you know? Or are there any practices or ways of being that are different?
I guess Jesus feels a lot nearer than I'd ever known before.
Right.
I guess that level of being with him isn't like that happened and now it's done. It's like, well, once we've gone there, we always have that.
Right.
You know?
It never can go rewind to like the less deep place.
Yeah. I mean, he said, he says, I will never leave you or forsake you. And to experience that in a deeper way, now I know that. Yeah. And will I maybe forget at some point? Who knows? You know, I hope not.
But you know it in your knower, if we want to say it that way. Like, it's a deep-rooted thing. I think a lot of times we read that in the scriptures, you know, I'll never leave you or forsake you. And we think it's like going to just be a comforting verse that we're going to quote ourselves at some point. But to know the tangible, palpable presence of Jesus not leaving you in your darkest hours.
Yeah.
It's pretty profound.
Yeah.
So, I mean, unless there's more you want to tell us about that.
Yeah, I do want to say that from a theological standpoint, I guess, that I don't believe that God caused cancer.
Right.
That, if we, don't give a crappy gift to our children,
right,
how much better is Father God
right,
going to be?
Yeah.
And so, I don't believe that, but I believe that throughout him, the presence of Jesus coming in a healing way to heal my body of cancer.
Yeah.
Also, he used that time as a special time for just him and I.
Yeah.
Again, not talking about being removed from things. Like I had like all sorts of things planned for 2020, as everyone did.
Right.
But having that removed
created space for you and the Lord. Well, and I appreciate you saying that, because it could sound like, oh, yeah, this was, God used this in such and such a way. So then some people would do theological math and be like, God gave it to you.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm with you. I don't think that he's the cause of these kinds of sufferings, but I think he's willing to be present to us in our suffering. God with us, Emmanuel, takes on whole new meaning.
Yeah.
But also the idea that we are in a world that's full of curse, and brokenness and decay and sickness and death are a part of that. And if ever we need a kingdom life, it comes into really clear focus that we need the King himself to be present to us when we're under that kind of evidence, if you will, of the brokenness in the world.
Yeah.
So that's a good theological caveat you threw in there.
Thanks.
What do you want us to take, like, none of us want your experience, Dan, let's be honest.
Yeah.
And you don't want it for any of us.
Yeah.
But we know that there's gold, like, or another way to describe it is like you've mined something of the intimate presence of God, or a fellowship with Jesus in your suffering, that we have, most of us, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say most of us have never had this experience. So what can we learn from what you've learned from Jesus this year? What's your encouragement to me, say as a follower of Jesus? What would you say, Joyce? Like, lean in here, or
I'll probably just read something.
Yep, come on now.
Suffering seems like an immovable mountain. It feels like the biggest thing, but love is greater than suffering. The pure and fiery love of Jesus, the one who suffered because of love and overcame because he loved us. His suffering, his suffering made me know that I was suffering with him.
Right.
And that his love is greater than the suffering that he went through, because his love caused him to overcome.
Yeah. So this is huge. So we might have to make a little post about this to remind ourselves this coming week. But and forward. But love is greater than suffering. It's like really simple truth, but really profound. Maybe we all need to like ponder that a little bit. To know the love of God, to dwarf whatever the hard things are that we might be journeying through. Yeah,
I think of that hymn where whoever wrote it says, and the things of earth grow strangely dim
in the light of his glory and grace. Yes? Wow. I think that's turn your eyes upon Jesus. Yeah, so that maybe is your encouragement on some level for me and anyone else who wants to go deeper with Jesus, is to turn toward Jesus, like to lean into Jesus, to look for Jesus. And maybe I'm just putting a little bit of words in your mouth here, but if we think back to what Dan and Leanne were saying last week about going to the quiet place and that gentle whisper, Dan's bird watching analogy, but like the idea that we would go and be in a quiet place with Jesus. Like you have to be, you had it imposed, but maybe for the rest of us, we have to choose some of that.
Yeah.
What do you think?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, that's the place where I met him in this much deeper way than I ever had. And so we all have the ability to not go to that depth of whatever I was going through, but a place where we can be just him and you know.
Yeah. Can we come back just to something you were saying a few minutes ago? Like, people might not know this, but like, you have done some things globally. Like, you've been away and done mission in different parts of the world. And I think not long before you came back to Calgary, yeah?
Yeah, my last time away was, I got back end of August of 2019. And so then
And where were you on that trip?
I was in Tanzania and South Africa for that.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what were you doing? Or what did you do in general in the mission kind of world?
Yeah, so part of what I do is photography and in support of different organizations. So in Tanzania, I was working with an orphanage that I've been with for a while. And then in South Africa, we were mostly doing, working with worship schools and healing ministry and stuff like that. So a lot of, trips to hospitals and praying for the sick and conferences and you name it, in the streets and things like that.
And you had done a stint as well in some refugee contexts?
Yeah, in northern Iraq. I was there for a month working in refugee camps there with Light a Candle.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'm pointing this out just in case you all don't know Dan as well as maybe I've been privileged to know him, but you're kind of hardcore for the Lord and passionate about seeing the kingdom come and a risk taker. I mean, how many of us go and pray for the sick in hospitals, right? So you've had this bend, if you will, this determination to know Jesus and to see his kingdom come. So then to me, it becomes more profound that you have had this suffering journey and met the intimate presence of Jesus. It's like you've known him on both sides of the coin, so to speak.
Yeah.
I think that's really, really helpful for us to hear, because sometimes we just want to see the intergalactic big stuff happen. And would you still pray for the sick? Do you still pray for the sick?
Yeah, I mean, my theology on that hasn't changed.
Right.
And just that last trip in South Africa, there was hardly a person that didn't get healed that we were praying for, all because of Jesus.
Right.
And then, to come home and then be diagnosed with cancer and, being like, well, I've seen most things get healed. So, so just trust in you, Lord, for this. And then, it's interesting that my expectations of I'm just get healed and then I'll just be jolly on my way kind of a thing was not how it went.
Right.
But I will say, after 2 rounds of chemo and with all sorts of people praying for me, from stage 3 to absolutely clear, which is somewhat miraculous.
Praise God, it is.
So going through another 4 months of chemo, because that's what you do, and to kill everything I
just wonder what wisdom the Lord's steeping you in this, of the already and the not yet, and the different ways we see healing come.
Yeah.
And to know that Jesus is more than all.
Yeah.
Whatever it is, Jesus is overall, in all. The love of Christ is bigger than whatever suffering. That is, some of us have to wait. We meet old people who we can see are full of the Lord, and then we go in it and we ask them, if you don't do this, I recommend it. Whenever you meet someone who's really radiating the presence of God, which I've been privileged to experience that. Probably lots of us, if you're watching and you've had that experience, go ahead and fire on the chat wall. Yeah, I've seen that, or I've had people I've known like that. You ask them, what's the Lord taught you in your lifetime? And then they come out with these bombs. You're not an old man yet, Dan.
I feel kind of old right now. But.
I know, but you're not. And yet, the Lord's given you this treasure, hard earned, but really profound wisdom. And I hope that you have a chance to teach it over a long lifetime, and to keep reaching, to see the sick healed, but also to be present to people in their very profound and deep suffering that isn't just jolly and you're on your way, as you kind of described it. Like, yeah, that tension is a hard one to live in, but you've kind of been schooled in it a little bit. Just a smidge.
Just a little.
What encouragement do you want to give our church? Like, as a whole, like, you've given us some great gift individually that we could pursue Jesus and lean in on, but is there anything specific you would say to us collectively?
Yeah, I think there's that story in the Bible of the woman who breaks the perfume on Jesus's feet and weeps on his feet and washes his feet with her hair. Yeah,
the alabaster jar was very valuable, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Didn't one of the disciples complain like it should have been sold?
It basically offended everybody,
right?
And Jesus comes to her defense and says, "This is going to be talked about forever." And for me, that was one of the most important verses for the last couple of years for me. I might.
Yeah, go for it. He's got gold in this journal, I'm telling you.
Yeah. When we come to Jesus, we fall at his feet as we recognize our irreparable poverty and our great need for him to save us. And then we look in the book of Revelation and we just see everyone falling at his feet again. If that is where we start and that is where we finish, then maybe that is where we belong the whole time. I don't think there is a higher place we can get to than to lavish our love at the feet of Jesus, that our lives would be costly oil poured out completely for him. And there's no greater joy than to enjoy his presence. That is what success looks like. And this keeps our eyes single and our hearts soft. And I think it is so important in our suffering to keep our hearts soft towards the Lord. Yeah.
With your permission, I think we might just need to cut and paste a little bit so that we can read it, steep in it, or re-watch. This is such a good word, because what you're calling us to is intimacy with the Lord and a posture of humility and hungering for the presence of God.
Yeah.
And I wonder, like, Callum and I have talked a little bit about what's it going to be like when we worship together again.
Yeah.
All our voices raised, and we had some moments pre-pandemic where you could feel the presence of God palpably in worship. Like, what would it look like for us to passionately pursue Jesus together, to fall at his feet, or to prostrate ourselves in worship? I hope it's okay that I mention this, but like when I was messaging with Dan about the interview today, he was saying, would we have any time before we start to worship together? And I was going from one meeting to the next, so it wasn't really going to work. And so he said, that's okay. It just helps me to know what kind of time frame we have. I'll take some time to worship before I come. And that really spoke to me, because I thought, this isn't just words, flowery words in a journal. This is a life lived. And I want to thank you for your example, for your faithfulness, for trusting us, sharing some of what Jesus, sorry, I'm emotional, what Jesus has taught you, so that it would call us to like set aside the busyness of our life and come into the intimate place and worship Jesus, to bow down and worship, to know our posture, our place, who we are, like that woman pouring it out.
Yeah.
And like the 24 elders that you see in the book of Revelation. I love that you pointed to those texts. Again, we'll put those up on the chat wall, but I think it's really important orientation that we're called to a life of worship. I think that's your point.
Yeah. No, I not having the busyness of anything else but also having, all, the heaviness and the suffering and the sickness. There's often when I was after chemo, I'd have like a 3-second prayer before I fell into bed, just saying, Jesus, I need you. And for him, and he was like already like there, and he says, that's all that I want, is just you to acknowledge your need for me, because it's an invitation for him to come, and I love, big meaty teachings like the next guy, or like excellent exegesis, or things like that, and that's so important, but that doesn't walk with you through suffering.
Right. It can't be Jesus.
Yeah. And if those things don't fit your theology and your whatever, doesn't lead you to the person of Jesus, then what is it for?
What's the point?
Yeah.
This is a good word. I mean, I like to think deeply about the things of God. And I don't want us to be slouches, if you will, theologically, but I don't want us to ever substitute anything for Jesus, not even the Word of God, which I think is very, very important, but it's not like Father, Spirit, and Bible. It's the presence of Jesus. You've given us an awful lot to ponder, to seek the Lord about, to engage in our practice. These can't be just things that, like, those are really nice things to hear. We get goosebumps, we feel something, but then we don't do anything with. So, I don't want to sound trite, because I would not have wished your year plus on anyone. And yet, the fruit on it is some good. And appreciate you sharing that with us, because we really do recognize that is gift and grace. And I hope for your whole lifetime you have the chance to tell some of your God story and the way Jesus has met you in your suffering, because I think it'll help other people in their suffering, but also the ones who aren't suffering to lean into Jesus more deeply. Praising God with you.
Praise God.